Yeah, yeah,
I think
yeah.
you picked up some really good points there, Paul, to be fair. Some really good points. I'm going to go down one of the routes, but if needed, maybe come back to the element around kind of that choices option, because there's a real life example that I can give on that one. But I think the bit that I picked up on was the element there around incentivizing processes to hit targets. And I think there's a piece where the industry as it's evolved, and we haven't got here by design. We're not starting from fresh to say, let's start to sell vehicles. This industry's been going on for whatever, 80, 90 years. Um, and regulation elements have changed, complexity's changed. The way we used to sell a vehicle 30, 40 years ago is very different now because the vehicles have changed, the laws have changed. But some of those elements haven't moved at the same pace or at the same time. And we still, as an industry, I actually think we're still driven by people that have been in the industry too long. And I'm not saying here, right, we should throw out all those experts and everything else, because I'm kind of, I've been there, I'm kind of part of that group. But I realize the fact that what we believe is right is only what we've learnt. And it's through those kind of almost through those lenses that we're kind of pitching ourselves. So I think that element about, we incentivize and we drive people down a process in order to hit sales margins is a very, very slippery road. But the OEMs are all keeping the factories running. Those
You do,
factories and
yeah.
those volumes is what's driving everything. I've talked before about this element of kind of the tail wagging the dog. In my mind, the factory is what generates all of the pressure in the industry and the way we act, in my personal view. Sorry, Justin, I know you come
Well,
in.
I was going to say, yeah, and the supply chain. So when you talk about factories, it's not just the car assembly factory, albeit the overheads of that are quite significant. But actually, it's the fact, where's the engine plant? Where's now the battery plant? Where's the door components, the seats, all the in-cabin module, the dashboard, everything. They're major supply components. So it's a very complex, committed from a cost overhead point of view, and time from a timeliness of supply, because nobody wants stock hanging around. And if you're committing to a volume, you want to ensure that supply to assembly to distribution to sale is flowing, because otherwise huge amounts of capital are tied up in that process. And I think that's always the balance. If you compare that now to the baked bean example, and I'm not saying, FMCG industries don't, but they have optimized their supply chains to real high speed turnover, and in the main, the capital tied up in stock is nothing like the same as it is in the car industry.
But I think you've got what you're describing there is a fundamental challenge for the industry, and we've talked to this a lot in our sort of mobility forums and things like that.
Yeah.
Is the industry is a supply driven industry, not a demand driven industry. So the industry is focused on supply. It's what do I have to sell, not what does the customer want. And that might be a controversial statement to make if I was in a room of industry experts. But I would say that's
back. I was going to say, Paul, it goes back to your comparison earlier about different if we're in the kind of proper high-end luxury bespoke end of the market, where it is, well, what is it you do want? Okay, let's configure that unique vehicle and it'll be ready in 3 years' time, or whatever the waiting list is. And people are saying, well, that's all right, because I've wanted this for ages, and when I get it, it's probably going to be the thing I drive on a Sunday, and it'll last, and its value will last for forever because it's unique. But what we're talking about is below that level, actually, where we're driving kind of volume and optimization, where
but
people
I
just
think the
want
same
mobility
I
as a
think the same
service, if you like.
I think the same thing applies though, because even if you talk about mobility as a service, or you talk about, I talk about, for a lot of people, for a petrol head, we might say the car is, it's excitement, it's emotion, it's all of these great things that we want to do. We know what its 0 to 60 time is. We know how many brake horsepower it's putting out. For maybe 80% of the audience, it's just a facilitator of life. It's what gets the kids to school. It's what gets me to work in the morning to enable me to live the life that I need to live. That doesn't make that car purchase any less important to that person than to a petrol head who's going out to buy their favorite form of transport. And I think that's the bit that is for me missing in the supply driven industry. It's not recognizing that actually you need to understand what the customer wants and why they want it, not what you need to sell and why you need to sell it. And it actually, I think, still applies even in volume, as much, well, maybe less so, but to the same extent it applies in specialist. That, okay, I may not be going out and buying a Ferrari if, you know, I'm a mum or dad of 3 and I need to get the kids to school, but the fact that I need to get the kids to school in a reliable and safe vehicle is just as important to me as probably which colour of Ferrari I'm going to buy to the person who has that sort of means. And I think that that still applies in a volume sense. And I think, again, the industry is really struggling with this concept of switching its whole mindset to what the customer wants and how the customer wants to purchase, as opposed to what do I need to sell to keep my factories open and get the return on investment for my shareholders.
I think you
and don't even get me started on EVs.
Why?
Well, cutting from that, I thought Jason had an interesting point where you're talking about, you know, our generation, because we are all of a similar generation and having been involved in this industry for some time. Yeah, we are. We've got, you know, maybe the outer reaches, you know, there's a mean through the middle. Anyway, but just put ourselves in the shoes of that next generation, our kids, you know, and who may have bought a used vehicle already, but if they get to the point of buying new vehicles, what will they expect based on their behaviours and their lifestyles and what they've grown up and what they're used to? And will it satisfy them, or just switch them off completely? I mean, it's and there may not be a right answer for that, but it goes back to this bit about every customer is different. I think there'll be cohorts of customer that are different. So, sweeping generalizations, so please take with a pinch of salt. But there are definitely categories of customer today that struggle to really understand all the implications of financing and what the options are available. You know, how much flexibility is there? You know, I mean, honestly, Auto Trader, we know, did this study like a year ago. Still, 90% of the car buying population don't understand the difference between a personal contract plan and a lease. They just think it's finance, but there are very, very clear differences for those of us who understand it. Yeah, but you know, at the end of the day, it's like, what can I do? And there's that fear factor, and actually, you know, and I used the example of the independent financial advisor earlier. Some of us may have over our lives had different financial advisors at different points in our lives, where we're first trying to understand mortgages or pensions or investments or something to do with money in our lives. But you put car buying in a similar bracket to all those other things, because the expenditure we're talking about is, pretty similar sums of money, right? To what you're saving in a pension, what you're investing in an investment product, or what you're spending on a mortgage. I mean, it's not that dissimilar. So are you getting that clarity, that kind of that simplicity, that empathizing with the customer to ensure they really understand? Because but that's what it is, as Paul, you say, for most people, means to life. But the commitment financially that's linked to it in most cases, equally requires that same kind of personalization and respect. Because some customers are just baffled by it. Some just don't want to do the detail at all. And some are all over it like a rash, and they've already got the spreadsheet, and they're confusing the hell out of the dealer because they know more about the finance than they do.
Yeah.
In some cases, Paul.
and or even more about the product than the dealer does as well, which is equally frustrating.
Yeah.
But
because you can read all about it now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You go into a dealership and you know more about what the vehicle does than the dealer does, at which point you're like, well, what's the experience you're giving me? Anyway, I do think there is, across all of those things, I think the thing that sticks out for me is almost if you approached vehicle selling from that concierge mentality. If you kind of said, this is one of, I always talk about it, it's the second most expensive thing you are ever going to buy in your life. So why wouldn't I treat you with a little bit more attention than, if even if you were going to buy an iPhone, or if you were going to buy an expensive product in a department store, you'd probably get more care and attention than you often get when you're buying a motor vehicle. Not always the case, because some, as we said before, some retailers, some brands do this really well. In my recent experience, I went to 3, maybe 4 different brands for the vehicle I ended up buying, and with one of them, the thing that the best experience I had, what stood out, was simply the salesperson who was dealing with me, who was, relative to me, a youngish person. They were probably their late 20s. And they just gave me, they were really attentive. Yeah, really young. They were just really attentive. They treated me like a real person. They treated me like I was important. They treated me like I had valid questions to ask, and they made an effort, and they stayed in touch with me. They treated me in a respectful way, and it was all about the human experience. And I think that's the piece that's missing in all of this. And if you go back to that sort of concierge mentality, and I know, the pushback will be, well, we can't do that. We're selling too many units. We don't have the time to do that. Well, that's kind of a choice that you make in reality, because in my experience, brands are throwing so much money at marketing and incentivizing the sales of those vehicles. If they actually spent some of that money on creating great customer experiences, they wouldn't have to put so much money into the sales and incentivization. And a little bit like Wes was saying earlier around, spending a chunk of money to actually have a vehicle for a period of time to truly evaluate it. In this last car purchasing experience and the time before, I would have happily spent 500 quid more, or paid 500 quid more for the vehicle, or £1,000 more for the vehicle, if I got the experience that I wanted, because I would know that that dealer, that retailer, that salesperson, that brand would sort me out. And actually, back to low friction and what you were talking about earlier about post-purchase, I want the ultimate low friction experience. And if I trust the retailer and trust the service they're giving me and know they're going to be all over me like a rash, price isn't my prime driver on the purchase of that vehicle.
I think
maybe
probably there's a piece, Paul. Sorry, Justin. I think there's a piece there, which is, with more and more new entrants, brand loyalty is going to continue to dwindle. You talk about younger generation, etc. This element of customer experience being a differentiator, I truly believe in, because we are spending so much on new acquisitions, new customers, and actually that element of, if we can create true advocacy within a brand, within a dealership, within a touch point, then the amount of money you're able to effectively be able to turn around and save as a result of that, it just pays in its own very, very quickly. But we're very, very short-sighted by saying, my margin's been cut, I've got to make sure I've got to cut my head count, I've got to do this. As part of some of those challenges, what seems to resolve is actually customer experience is the bit that's ignored, or the bit that's pushed to the side. Long time ago, you used to always get that example I said earlier, your vehicle's clean when it was returned for a service. I can't remember the last time I had my vehicle clean when I had it serviced. So those types of examples, I think, are getting weared away with the view of, right, we've got to cut costs, we've got to cut costs, we've got to cut costs. And with new entrants coming in, brand loyalty is dwindling. And I think we're going to end up in a piece where people are just going to try different things. And we're going to keep just fighting the getting new consumers.